The heavy bag swayed slightly as Maya Chun wrapped her hands with methodical precision. Each loop of the cotton tape, a ritual she'd performed countless times in the solitude of her garage. At 32, she moved with an economy of motion that spoke of muscle memory carved deep through years of practice, though no one at Steelhead Martial Arts Academy would ever guess it. To them, she was simply the quiet accountant who paid her monthly membership fee on time and kept to herself in the back corner during open gym hours. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights of the downtown Seattle gym cast harsh shadows across the training floor where a dozen fighters prepared for the evening session. Maya had deliberately arrived early, hoping to get some training in before the main crowd descended. She preferred the anonymity of those quiet moments, when she could move without judgment, without the snickers and sideways glances that had become as familiar as her own reflection. The sound of the front door chiming announced the arrival of the evening regulars. Maya's shoulders tensed involuntarily as familiar voices echoed across the gym floor. She continued her hand wrapping, keeping her eyes focused on the task while her peripheral vision tracked the group settling into their usual territory near the ring. Coach Derek Thornton's voice cut through the ambient noise like a blade through silk. Even without looking, Maya could picture his imposing frame, the way he carried himself with the confidence of someone who'd never been told he didn't belong. At 45, Thornton had built Steelhead into one of the most respected fighting gyms on the West Coast, training professional fighters who competed at the highest levels of kickboxing and mixed martial arts. "All right, ladies and gentlemen," Thornton's voice boomed across the gym. "Tonight we're working combinations. Real fight scenarios. This isn't aerobics kickboxing or some weekend warrior nonsense. We're here to build fighters, not fitness enthusiasts." Maya felt the familiar sting of the implied criticism. She'd heard variations of this speech dozens of times, each one a reminder that she existed on the periphery of a world that barely acknowledged her presence. The irony wasn't lost on her that the very techniques Thornton taught with such authority were movements she'd been perfecting since she was 8 years old. The group that surrounded Thornton represented the gym's elite. Marcus Rivera, a light heavyweight with professional aspirations and a mouth that never stopped running. Jessica Walsh, whose aggressive style had earned her 3 amateur titles, and an ego to match. Tommy Park, a middleweight who treated every training session like a personal audition for greatness. They moved with the casual arrogance of people who'd never been forced to prove their right to exist in a space. "Chun." Thornton's voice carried across the gym with the tone of someone addressing a minor inconvenience. "You planning to actually train today, or just work on your hand-wrapping technique?" The comment drew chuckles from his inner circle, and Maya felt heat creep up her neck. She finished securing her wraps and moved toward the heavy bags, hoping to blend into the background as the real training began. But Thornton wasn't finished with her. "You know what? Why don't you join us today?" His suggestion carried the weight of a challenge wrapped in false encouragement. "Might be good for you to see how actual fighters train." Maya's stomach dropped. She'd spent months carefully avoiding this moment, arriving early and leaving before the advanced classes, maintaining the careful invisibility that allowed her to train without confrontation. But now, with the entire gym watching and Thornton's expectant stare boring into her, retreat wasn't an option. "I appreciate the offer, Coach," Maya said quietly, "but I'm fine working on my own." "Oh, come on," Marcus Rivera interjected, his voice carrying mock encouragement. "Don't be shy. We don't bite much." The laughter that followed felt like fingernails on a chalkboard. Maya glanced around the gym, noting the mixture of amusement and pity in the faces watching her. To them, she was the accountant playing dress-up, the weekend warrior who didn't understand her place in the food chain. What none of them knew, what Maya had never told anyone at Steelhead, was that she'd been fighting since before most of them had discovered martial arts existed. Growing up in her grandmother's house in San Francisco's Chinatown, she'd spent her afternoons not in after-school programs, but in the basement studio where her po-po taught traditional kung fu to a small group of dedicated students. Grandmaster Lu Chun had been a legend in certain circles, a woman who'd fought professionally in Hong Kong during an era when female fighters were rare as unicorns. She'd emigrated to America with nothing but her skills and an unshakable belief that combat sports were about far more than physical dominance. Under her tutelage, Maya had learned not just techniques but philosophy, not just how to fight but why fighting mattered. Popo had died when Maya was 18, taking with her the stories of underground tournaments and secret training sessions where the old ways were preserved. Maya had honored her grandmother's memory by continuing to train, adapting traditional techniques to modern kickboxing, finding ways to blend ancient wisdom with contemporary combat sports. But she'd also learned to hide that knowledge, to present herself as nothing more than a hobbyist whose involvement in martial arts extended only as far as fitness and stress relief. "Look," Thornton said, his patience clearly wearing thin, "you pay the same membership fee as everyone else. You've got every right to train here. But if you're going to take up space during prime hours, you might as well get some real instruction." The word real hit Maya like a physical blow. She'd been getting real instruction since she was a child, had studied under masters whose names would never appear on gym walls, but whose knowledge ran deeper than any certification program. But pointing that out would only invite more ridicule, more questions she wasn't prepared to answer. Besides, Jessica Walsh added with a smirk, it might be fun to have someone to demonstrate techniques on. Someone who won't hit back too hard. The casual cruelty of the comment sparked something dangerous in Maya's chest. For just a moment, she allowed herself to imagine what would happen if she stopped hiding, if she showed them exactly what 24 years of serious training had built. But the fantasy faded quickly, replaced by the familiar weight of practicality. She had a job to protect, a reputation to maintain, a life that existed outside these walls. "I'll stick to the bags tonight," Maya said, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her chest. "But thank you for the offer." Thornton shrugged, already losing interest in the exchange. "Suit yourself. Just stay out of the way when we start sparring." As the group moved toward the ring, Maya caught fragments of their conversation. Words like fitness kickboxing and weekend warrior and probably thinks she's tough drifted back to her like smoke from a fire she couldn't escape. She turned toward the heavy bag with renewed focus, channeling her frustration into combinations that would have impressed anyone who knew what to look for. Her hands moved in patterns that blended traditional kung fu with modern boxing. Feet, following footwork that her grandmother had drilled into her until it became as natural as breathing. Each strike carried power generated not just from her arms, but from her entire body. Hip rotation and weight transfer, creating force that made the heavy bag shudder on its chains. But to the casual observer, she was just another gym member working out her office stress on a piece of equipment. The sound of gloves hitting pads echoed from the ring as Thornton put his fighters through their paces. Maya tried to focus on her own training, but she couldn't help overhearing the instruction being given. Basic combinations that she'd mastered as a teenager. Footwork patterns that her grandmother had taught her were fundamental building blocks. Defense techniques that seemed almost primitive compared to the flowing counters she'd learned in her Popo's basement studio. "Higher hands, Marcus," Thornton called out. "You're dropping your guard every time you throw that right cross." Maya's own hands tightened on her gloves as she heard the correction. The solution wasn't just about hand position. It was about understanding the relationship between offense and defense, about maintaining structure while generating power. But explaining that would require revealing knowledge she wasn't ready to share. 30 minutes into the session, Maya noticed a shift in the gym's energy. The front door had opened again, and this time the newcomer commanded immediate attention. Elena Vasquez moved through the space with the fluid confidence of someone who'd earned every ounce of respect she received. As a former professional kickboxer and current coach of several ranked fighters, her presence at Steelhead was both rare and significant. Vasquez was everything Maya had dreamed of becoming, a woman who'd succeeded in a male-dominated sport through sheer skill and determination. She'd fought professionally for 8 years, retiring undefeated and transitioning into coaching with the same intensity she'd brought to competition. Her fighters consistently performed at the highest levels, and her reputation extended far beyond the Seattle martial arts community. Elena, Thornton's voice carried genuine respect as he approached the legendary coach. "Didn't expect to see you tonight." "Derek," Vasquez replied with a nod. "Heard good things about your program. Thought I'd stop by and see what you're building." Here, Maya felt a chill of excitement mixed with terror. Elena Vasquez represented everything she aspired to be, but also everything that seemed impossibly out of reach. The gulf between her current reality and Vasquez's achievements felt as wide as an ocean. "Feel free to observe," Thornton said, his chest puffing with pride. "We've got some real talent here. Marcus is looking at turning pro next year, and Jessica's considering a move up to the international amateur circuit." As Vasquez settled near the ring to watch the training, Maya redoubled her focus on the heavy bag. Part of her desperately wanted to catch the attention of someone who might recognize her abilities, but a larger part was terrified of the exposure that recognition would bring. She'd built her life on careful compartmentalization, keeping her fighting knowledge separate from her professional identity, maintaining the illusion that she was nothing more than a casual practitioner. The training session continued with Thornton showcasing his best students for Vasquez's benefit. Maya watched from her corner as familiar techniques were performed with varying degrees of skill. Marcus's power was undeniable, but his technique was sloppy. Jessica had good fundamentals but relied too heavily on aggression. Tommy showed promise but lacked the mental discipline necessary for high-level competition. None of them were bad fighters, Maya realized. They were simply products of a system that prioritized certain qualities over others, that valued obvious attributes like size and aggression, while overlooking subtler elements like timing and flow. Under different circumstances with different instruction, any of them could become significantly better fighters. But those circumstances didn't exist at Steelhead, and Maya wasn't in a position to provide alternative guidance. She was just the accountant who paid her membership fee and tried to stay out of everyone's way. "All right, let's see some sparring," Thornton announced as the session neared its end. "Light contact, work on your timing." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Maya began unwrapping her hands, preparing to leave before the sparring began. She'd learned that watching other people fight while unable to participate herself was a special kind of torture. But as she gathered her gear, Vasquez's voice stopped. Her cold, "Excuse me," the legendary coach said, approaching Maya's corner. "I couldn't help noticing your bag work. Your footwork is very interesting." Maya's heart hammered against her ribs as every eye in the gym turned toward their conversation. "Thank you," she managed to say. "I've been training for a while." "I can tell," Vasquez replied with a knowing smile. "Traditional background?" The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Maya could feel Thornton and his fighters listening intently, could sense their curiosity mixed with skepticism. This was the moment she'd been avoiding for months. The crossroads where her carefully maintained anonymity collided with her deepest desires. Maya said carefully. "My grandmother taught me a few things." "A few things," Vasquez repeated with obvious amusement. "That was some very sophisticated few things I just watched." The conversation with Elena Vasquez had lasted only a few minutes, but its impact on Maya's carefully ordered world was seismic. As she drove home through Seattle's evening traffic, her hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel, residual adrenaline from the encounter mixing with a cocktail of hope and terror that she couldn't quite process. Vasquez had asked pointed questions about her training background, questions that suggested she'd seen something in Maya's movements that others had missed. But Maya had deflected each inquiry with practiced vagueness, maintaining the fiction that her skills were nothing more than casual hobby developed over years of recreational training. The legendary coach had seemed skeptical but hadn't pressed the issue, instead extending an invitation that now burned in Maya's memory like a brand. "If you ever want to train seriously," Vasquez had said as she prepared to leave, "give me a call. I work with fighters who are ready to commit to excellence." The business card now sat on Maya's kitchen counter like a piece of evidence from a crime she hadn't yet committed. Elena Vasquez, Elite Combat Sports, followed by a phone number that represented everything Maya had ever wanted and everything she was too afraid to pursue. Maya's apartment reflected the careful duality of her existence. The living room was decorated with the understated professionalism of someone who worked in corporate finance, all neutral colors and clean lines. But step into her bedroom, and the walls told a different story. Photographs of her grandmother in fighting stance, newspaper clippings from Popo's competitive career, traditional weapons mounted with reverence rather than decoration. This was the shrine to a life that Maya honored in private but could never fully claim as her own. She picked up one of the framed photographs, studying her grandmother's face. Even in the faded black and white image, Liu Chun's eyes burned with an intensity that time couldn't diminish. Popo had been barely 5 feet tall, but she'd possessed a presence that filled entire rooms. She'd taught Maya that true strength came not from size or aggression, but from understanding, from knowing yourself and your capabilities so completely that external validation became irrelevant. "But what if I'm afraid, Popo?" Maya had asked during one of their training sessions, struggling with a particularly difficult combination that required her to move past her comfort zone. "Fear is information," her grandmother had replied in her precise English, each word carefully chosen for maximum impact. "It tells you where growth is possible, but it should not tell you where to stop." Maya set the photograph down and moved to her computer, opening the spreadsheet that governed her professional life. Numbers and formulas filled the screen, the digital representation of her day job as a senior financial analyst at Morrison & Associates. It was work she was good at, work that paid well and provided the stability that allowed her to pursue martial arts as an expensive hobby. But it was also work that felt increasingly hollow as she got older, increasingly disconnected from the person she was when she stepped onto a training floor. The disconnect had grown worse since her promotion 6 months earlier. The new position came with increased responsibilities and higher visibility within the company. Her supervisor, Patricia Williams, had made it clear that advancement at Morrison required complete dedication to the firm's culture of excellence. Personal pursuits were fine as long as they didn't interfere with professional growth, and anything that might damage the company's conservative image was strongly discouraged. Maya had learned this lesson the hard way when a colleague discovered her gym membership and made a joke about accountants who think they're fighters during a team meeting. The comment had been delivered with the casual cruelty that characterized much of the office humor, but Patricia's expression had made it clear that Maya's martial arts involvement was now on the radar as a potential liability. "We have to be careful about our image," Patricia had said during Maya's performance review. "Clients need to see us as serious professionals, not weekend warriors playing at being tough. I'm not saying you need to quit your hobby, but maybe consider something more appropriate. Yoga, perhaps, Pilates." The suggestion had stung more than any physical blow Maya had ever received. 24 years of dedicated training, thousands of hours of sweat and sacrifice, reduced to a hobby that needed to be managed for the sake of corporate appearances. But Maya had smiled and nodded and promised to be more mindful of how her outside activities might reflect on the firm. Now staring at the spreadsheet full of quarterly projections and budget analyses, Maya wondered if she was slowly suffocating her own soul for the sake of security. The numbers on the screen represented stability, predictability, a path that led toward partnership and financial success. But they also represented a life where her truest self remained hidden, where her deepest passions were treated as embarrassing quirks that needed to be managed. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her training partner, the only person in her current life who knew the full extent of her background. David Liu, her second cousin and the son of one of Popo's former students, had moved to Seattle 2 years earlier for a job in tech. He'd been delighted to discover that Maya was still training, still honoring their grandmother's teachings in her own way. "Heard from my dad that you had an interesting conversation at the gym tonight," the message read. Elena Vasquez knows talent when she sees it. Maya stared at the message, wondering how news had traveled so quickly. David's father still maintained connections within the traditional martial arts community, networks of knowledge and gossip that spanned generations and continents. If word of her encounter with Vasquez had already reached those circles, it meant her carefully maintained anonymity was beginning to crack. She typed back quickly, "Just a casual conversation. Nothing significant." David's response came immediately. "Popo didn't teach you to lie this badly. When are you going to stop hiding?" The question hit harder than Maya expected. She'd been asking herself the same thing for years, watching other people pursue dreams while she maintained the safety of mediocrity. But the answer was more complicated than David understood. He worked in an industry where eccentricity was valued, where having unusual hobbies or hidden talents was seen as a mark of creative thinking. The corporate world where Maya had built her career operated by different rules that rewarded conformity and punished anything that deviated from expected norms. "It's not that simple," she typed back. "I have responsibilities." "To who?" "The people who don't know who you really are." Maya set the phone aside without responding. David meant well, but he didn't understand the careful balance she'd constructed. He'd never had to choose between authentic self-expression and professional security, never had to weigh his deepest passions against practical considerations, like health insurance and retirement planning. But as she returned to her spreadsheet, Maya found her concentration shattered. The numbers blurred together as her mind replayed the evening's events. Vasquez's knowing look when she'd mentioned traditional background. The way Thornton's fighters had watched their conversation with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. The business card that still sat on her kitchen counter like a bridge between her current reality and an alternative future she didn't dare imagine. Maya closed the laptop and moved to her bedroom, changing into the loose cotton pants and tank top she wore for her evening practice. This was her private time, the hour each night when she honored her grandmother's memory by moving through forms that connected her to a lineage stretching back centuries. The movements began slowly, breathing exercises that centered her mind and prepared her body for the work ahead. Traditional stances flowed into modern combinations, ancient wisdom blending with contemporary technique and patterns that her grandmother had taught her to see as meditation in motion. Each technique carried layers of meaning beyond its immediate application, philosophical principles encoded in physical expression. As she moved through the familiar sequences, Maya felt the tension of the day beginning to dissolve. This was who she really was, not the compliant accountant who smiled at corporate jokes or the invisible gym member who avoided confrontation. This was the woman her grandmother had raised, the fighter who carried forward traditions that predated modern martial arts by generations. But the peace was temporary, shattered by the sound of her phone ringing. Maya glanced at the caller ID and felt her stomach drop. Patricia Williams calling at 9 o'clock on a Wednesday night could only mean trouble. "Maya," Patricia's voice. was crisp and professional despite the late hour. "I need to speak with you about something that's come to my attention." "Of course," Maya replied, her mind racing through potential problems. "What can I help you with?" "I received a call this evening from a client who was at some kind of martial arts event. He mentioned seeing someone who looked exactly like you in what he described as a rather intense training environment. I assured him that must have been a case of mistaken identity, since I know you're far too professional to be involved in anything that might reflect poorly on the firm." Maya's blood turned to ice. One of Morrison's clients had been at Steelhead tonight, had witnessed her interaction with Elena Vasquez, and had thought enough of it to call her supervisor. The careful compartmentalization she'd maintained for years was crumbling in real time. "Patricia, I can explain," Maya began, but her supervisor cut her off. "There's nothing to explain, because obviously there's been some kind of misunderstanding. You would never put yourself or the firm in a position where our professional image could be compromised, isn't that correct?" The question was a trap disguised as an exit ramp. Patricia was giving her the opportunity to deny everything, to maintain the fiction that her martial arts involvement was minimal and safe. All Maya had to do was agree that there'd been a misunderstanding, promise to be more careful about where she was seen, and continue living the divided life she'd constructed. But as she opened her mouth to speak, Maya's eyes fell on her grandmother's photograph. Popo's gaze seemed to burn through the glass, challenging her with the same intensity that had pushed Maya past every limitation she'd ever encountered. The woman who'd fought professionally when female fighters were unthinkable, who'd built a legacy through sheer determination and unwillingness to accept other people's definitions of what was possible. "Maya," Patricia's voice carried an edge of impatience. "I need to know that we understand each other." Maya took a deep breath, feeling the weight of a decision that would reshape everything that came after. "Yes," she said quietly, "we understand each other perfectly." "Excellent. I knew I could count on your good judgment. Have a pleasant evening." The line went dead, leaving Maya alone with the consequences of her choice. She'd bought herself time by avoiding confrontation, but she'd also accepted the prison of other people's expectations. Tomorrow she would return to Morrison and Associates and pretend that her truest self didn't exist, that her deepest passions were embarrassing hobbies that needed to be hidden from view. But tonight, she would honor her grandmother's memory by continuing to train, continuing to grow, and continuing to prepare for a future that might require courage she didn't yet know she possessed. Maya returned to her forms with renewed intensity, each movement carrying the weight of decisions made and possibilities deferred. The woman her grandmother had raised was still there, still growing stronger in the shadows, still waiting for the moment when hiding would no longer be an option. That moment was coming sooner than Maya realized, approaching with the inevitability of a storm that had been building for years. And when it arrived, she would have to choose between the safety of invisibility and the dangerous freedom of living as the fighter she'd always been meant to be. The next morning brought Seattle's typical November weather, a combination of drizzle and gray skies that matched Maya's mood perfectly. She dressed for work with extra care, choosing a conservative navy suit that projected exactly the kind of professional image Patricia Williams valued. Every detail of her appearance was calculated to reinforce the fiction that she was nothing more than a dedicated financial analyst whose outside interests posed no threat to corporate decorum. Morrison and Associates occupied 3 floors of a glass tower in downtown Seattle, its offices designed to project stability and success to clients who entrusted the firm with millions of dollars in assets. Maya's cubicle sat in the middle of the analyst bullpen, surrounded by colleagues who measured their worth in billable hours and advancement opportunities. It was a world where conformity was rewarded and individuality was tolerated only if it contributed to the bottom line. Maya settled into her workstation and immediately noticed the difference in how her colleagues interacted with her. Conversations That would normally include her now took place in hushed tones near the coffee station. Glances that had once been friendly now carried undertones of curiosity and judgment. News of last night's phone call had somehow made its way through the office grapevine, transforming her from reliable team member into potential liability overnight. "Maya," a voice called from behind her. She turned to see James Morrison, the firm's managing partner and grandson of its founder. His presence in the analyst section was unusual enough to draw attention from every workstation in the area. "Mr. Morrison," Maya replied, standing quickly and smoothing her skirt. "How can I help you?" Morrison was a man in his 50s who carried himself with the casual authority of someone born into privilege. He'd inherited both the firm and its conservative culture from his father, maintaining traditions that valued discretion and respectability above all else. His expression as he looked at Maya was unreadable, but his presence suggested that last night's conversation with Patricia had been escalated to the highest levels. "Walk with me," Morrison said, turning toward the conference room without waiting for a response. Maya followed, acutely aware of the eyes tracking their movement across the office floor. Whatever was about to happen, it would be witnessed by everyone who mattered to her professional future. The conference room door closed, with a soft click that sounded like a cell door slamming shut. "Sit down, Maya," Morrison said, taking his place at the head of the polished oak table. "We need to discuss your future with this firm." Maya's heart pounded as she settled into the leather chair across from him. "Sir, if this is about last night, I can explain. Can you?" Morrison's eyebrows rose slightly. "Because from what?" "I understand. You've been living a double life that you've carefully hidden from your colleagues and supervisors. That doesn't suggest someone who's prepared to explain anything honestly." The accusation stung because it was partially true. Maya had compartmentalized her life, kept her martial arts background separate from her professional identity. But characterizing that as deception felt unfair, especially coming from a man who'd never had to choose between personal authenticity and career security. "Mr. Morrison, my training has never interfered with my work performance. My productivity metrics are among the highest in the department, and I've never missed a deadline or compromised a client relationship because of outside activities." "This isn't about productivity," Morrison replied sharply. "This is about judgment, about understanding what it means to represent this firm in the community. When clients see our employees engaging in activities that are inconsistent with our image, it raises questions about our culture and values." Maya felt anger building in her chest, a familiar heat that she'd learned to control through years of meditation and discipline. "What activities would those be, sir? Physical fitness? Self-defense training? Learning skills that promote confidence and mental discipline?" Morrison's expression hardened. "Don't play word games with me, Maya. We both know that what you're involved in goes far beyond casual fitness. Professional fighting is a world of violence and spectacle that has no place in a respectable financial services firm." "I'm not a professional fighter," Maya said quietly. "I'm a martial artist who happens to work in finance." "And therein lies the problem." Morrison stood and walked to the window overlooking downtown Seattle. "You see yourself as a martial artist first and a Morrison employee second. That priority structure is incompatible with advancement in this organization." The conversation was moving toward an ultimatum that Maya could see approaching like a freight train. Morrison wasn't interested in discussion or compromise. He was interested in compliance or elimination. The choice he was about to present would force her to choose between the career she'd built and the identity she'd inherited from her grandmother. "I'm going to be direct with you," Morrison continued without turning from the window. "Your supervisor has recommended termination based on concerns about your judgment and commitment to firm values. I'm willing to override that recommendation under specific conditions." Maya's throat felt dry as sandpaper. "What conditions?" "Complete cessation of martial arts activities." No more gym memberships, no more training, no more association with anything that could be construed as combat sports. You focus entirely on your career here and demonstrate through your actions that Morrison and Associates is your top priority. The demand hung in the air like a poison cloud. Morrison was asking her to amputate part of herself, to abandon not just a hobby, but a core element of her identity. The training that connected her to her grandmother, the skills that had shaped her character, the discipline that had made her successful in every area of her life, all of it deemed incompatible with corporate respectability. And if I refuse? Maya asked, though she already knew the answer. Morrison finally turned from the window, his expression carrying the cold finality of someone accustomed to having his demands met without question. Then you'll be terminated for failure to maintain professional standards. Your employment contract includes provisions about conduct that reflects negatively on the firm. Continuation of activities that compromise our image would constitute grounds for immediate dismissal. Maya stared at the conference table, seeing her reflection in its polished surface. The woman looking back at her was wearing a conservative business suit and projecting exactly the kind of professional image that Morrison valued. But underneath that surface, invisible to everyone except herself, was the fighter her grandmother had raised. The question was whether she had the courage to let that fighter emerge, regardless of the consequences. "I need time to consider this," Maya said finally. Of course, Morrison's tone suggested that her consideration was a mere formality. "Take the rest of the day, but I'll need your decision first thing tomorrow morning. And Maya, choose carefully. Financial analysts with your background are easier to replace than you might think." The threat was clear and professionally delivered. Maya gathered her belongings and left the conference room with as much dignity as she could muster, but she could feel the weight of every gaze as she walked past her colleagues' workstations. By evening, everyone in the office would know that she'd been given an ultimatum. By tomorrow, they'd know whether she'd chosen career security or professional suicide. Maya drove home through the afternoon traffic in a state of emotional numbness that felt like shock. 24 hours ago, her biggest concern had been avoiding confrontation at the gym. Now she was facing the potential destruction of everything she'd built professionally, all because someone had seen her talking to Elena Vasquez and decided that her involvement in martial arts was somehow threatening to corporate image. Her apartment felt different when she entered, as if the conversation with Morrison had changed the molecular structure of the air itself. The careful duality that had defined her living space now seemed like evidence of her own cowardice, proof that she'd been living a lie designed to make other people comfortable with her existence. Maya walked to her bedroom and stood before her grandmother's photographs, studying the faces that had shaped her understanding of what it meant to be strong. Popo's competitive career had spanned an era when women weren't supposed to fight. Professionally, when every match was a battle against not just an opponent, but an entire culture that viewed female fighters as novelties or aberrations. "You never hid who you were," Maya said to the photograph. "Even when it would have been easier. Even when people told you it was impossible." But her grandmother had also lived in a different time, a different world. Popo had never had to navigate corporate politics or worry about health insurance or plan for retirement in a system that punished nonconformity. The choices that had been available to Lu Chun simply didn't exist for Maya, at least not without consequences that her grandmother had never been forced to consider. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from David. "Coffee tonight. I have news about a tournament that might interest you." She stared at the message for several minutes before responding. "Rain check. Dealing with some work issues. Anything I can help with?" Maya started to type "no, but thanks," then deleted it. Started to explain about Morrison's ultimatum, then deleted that too. Finally, she simply wrote, "Not yet, but I'll let you know." As evening approached, Maya found herself drawn to Elena Vasquez's business card with increasing frequency. Each time she passed through the kitchen, Her eyes would find it on the counter, and each time she would imagine what might happen if she actually made the call. Vasquez represented a path that led away from corporate safety towards something unknown and potentially dangerous. But she also represented authenticity, the possibility of living as the fighter Maya had been trained to be rather than the accountant she'd become for practical reasons. Maya picked up the card and turned it over in her hands, feeling the weight of possibility it represented. On one side was contact information for elite combat sports, a legitimate business that trained serious fighters for serious competition. On the other side was everything she'd ever wanted and everything she was too afraid to pursue. Her phone rang, interrupting her contemplation. The caller ID showed her mother's number, and Maya felt a familiar mix of love and anxiety. Margaret Chun had sacrificed enormously to provide Maya with educational opportunities that she herself had never had. The idea of throwing away a prestigious career to pursue fighting would be incomprehensible to a woman who'd worked double shifts as a nurse to pay for her daughter's college education. "Hi, Mom," Maya answered, trying to inject normalcy into her voice. "Maya, sweetheart, how are you? I was just thinking about you today and wanted to hear your voice." "I'm fine," Maya lied smoothly. "Just dealing with some work projects. Still enjoying the new position? You worked so hard for that promotion." The question felt like a knife twisting in her chest. Margaret's pride in Maya's corporate success was genuine and absolute. She'd grown up in poverty, raised by a mother who fought professionally to put food on the table, and she'd devoted her life to ensuring that her daughter would never have to choose between personal fulfillment and financial security. "It's challenging," Maya said carefully. "Lots of responsibility." "That's wonderful, honey. Your grandmother would be so proud to see you succeeding in the business world. She always said education was the key to freedom." Maya felt tears, threatening as she thought about the grandmother her mother remembered. To Margaret, Popo had been a loving parent who'd used fighting as a means to an end, a way to provide for her family until better opportunities became available. She'd never understood that for Lu Chun, martial arts weren't just a job but a calling, a fundamental expression of who she was as a person. "Mom, what if Popo had been able to keep fighting? If she'd had the opportunity to really pursue it without worrying about money?" Margaret was quiet for a moment, considering the question. "I think she would have chosen family every time, sweetie. She fought because she had to, not because she wanted to. When better options became available, she was happy to leave that world behind." The tournament invitation arrived 3 days after Maya had made her decision to leave Morrison and Associates. David had been right about having news that would interest her, though he couldn't have predicted the timing would coincide with the complete restructuring of her life. The Northwest Regional Championship represented everything she'd dreamed of pursuing, but never dared to attempt. A legitimate competition that would test her skills against opponents who'd trained their entire lives for moments like this. Maya held the registration form in her hands as she sat in the empty apartment that no longer felt like home. The corporate furniture seemed foreign now, artifacts from a life that belonged to someone else. Her resignation letter had been submitted that morning, delivered to James Morrison with a professional courtesy that barely concealed her relief at finally being honest about her priorities. Morrison's reaction had been predictably cold and dismissive. He'd accepted her resignation with the air of someone whose expectations had been confirmed, making it clear that she was burning bridges that could never be rebuilt. The conversation had lasted less than 5 minutes, ending with his observation that people who chose personal indulgence over professional responsibility typically learned to regret their decisions. But sitting here now, reading the tournament details that Elena Vasquez had personally recommended her for, Maya felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Not just excitement or anticipation, but a bone-deep sense of rightness that made every sacrifice feel worthwhile. This was what her grandmother had meant when she talked about following your true path, regardless of the obstacles. The tournament was scheduled for 6 weeks away, giving Maya just enough time to prepare if she committed completely to the process. Vasquez had agreed to provide coaching and training support, but she'd been clear about the expectations. This wouldn't be a casual participation in a local competition. This was a serious attempt to compete at a level that would determine whether Maya had the ability to pursue fighting professionally. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from David. "Made your decision yet about the tournament? Registration closes tomorrow." She looked around the apartment one more time, taking inventory of a life that had been built on other people's expectations rather than her own desires. The conservative furniture, the professional wardrobe, the carefully curated image of corporate success. All of it felt like costume pieces from a play she no longer wanted to perform in. Maya picked up her pen and filled out the registration form with handwriting that grew steadier with each line. Name, weight class, fighting experience, emergency contact information. Each detail was a step further away from the safety of anonymity and closer to the dangerous territory of authentic self-expression. The weight class question gave her pause. At 5 feet 6 inches and 135 pounds, she fell squarely into the bantamweight division. But her training background was unlike anything the other competitors would bring to the tournament. Traditional kung fu blended with modern kickboxing, techniques passed down through generations combined with contemporary athletic conditioning. She would be fighting opponents who'd trained in conventional gyms under established coaches, while her foundation came from a basement studio in Chinatown where ancient wisdom had been preserved through oral tradition. Maya completed the form and sealed it in an envelope, then walked to her car without allowing herself time to reconsider. The mailbox on the corner represented a point of no return, and she approached it with the same focused intensity she brought to training. Once the envelope disappeared into the slot, there would be no pretending that this was just a casual flirtation with competition. She would be committed to a path that led toward unknown territory. The sound of the envelope hitting the bottom of the mailbox felt like a gunshot in the quiet evening air. Maya stood on the sidewalk for several minutes, processing the magnitude of what she'd just done. In the space of a week, she'd resigned from a prestigious job and committed to competing in a tournament that would test everything her grandmother had taught her. The financial security she'd spent years building was gone, replaced by the uncertain prospect of pursuing fighting as more than just a hobby. But underneath the anxiety and uncertainty, Maya felt something that had been missing from her life for longer than she cared to admit. She felt alive in a way that spreadsheets and quarterly projections had never allowed, connected to a purpose that extended beyond corporate advancement or financial accumulation. This was what it meant to honor her grandmother's legacy, not just in private training sessions, but in the public arena where true tests of skill took place. Maya drove home through Seattle's evening traffic with a sense of anticipation that made every red light feel like an obstacle to overcome. Tomorrow she would begin training with Elena Vasquez, would start preparing for competition at a level she'd only dreamed about. The transformation from hidden martial artist to legitimate competitor would require rebuilding not just her fighting skills, but her entire identity. The next morning arrived gray and drizzling, typical Pacific Northwest weather that matched Maya's nervous energy perfectly. She dressed in training gear that felt different now that it represented her primary occupation rather than a hobby squeezed between work obligations. The drive to elite combat sports took her through neighborhoods she'd never explored, areas where warehouses had been converted into gyms and studios that catered to serious athletes rather than casual fitness enthusiasts. Elena Vasquez's facility occupied an entire building in an industrial district south of downtown Seattle. The exterior was unmarked except for a small sign that identified it as Elite Combat Sports, but the interior revealed a world-class training environment that hummed with focused intensity. Professional fighters moved through their routines with the kind of dedication that separated competitors from hobbyists, each one pursuing excellence with single-minded determination. Maya paused in the doorway, overwhelmed by the energy of a place where fighting was treated as art rather than aggression. The sound of gloves hitting heavy bags created a rhythm that seemed to pulse through the building's foundation. Fighters moved through combinations with fluidity that spoke of thousands of hours of practice, their techniques polished to a level of efficiency that made every movement count. "You made the right choice," Elena Vasquez's voice carried across the gym floor as she approached Maya with a knowing smile. "I can see it in your posture. You're finally standing like the fighter you've always been." Maya felt heat creep up her neck at the observation. "I'm nervous," she admitted. "It's been a long time since I've thought of myself as someone who competes." "Nervousness is good," Vasquez replied. "It means you understand that this matters. Come on, let me show you what we're building here." The tour that followed opened Maya's eyes to possibilities she'd never considered. Elite Combat Sports wasn't just a gym, but a comprehensive training center that approached fighting as both physical and mental discipline. Strength and conditioning equipment that rivaled professional sports facilities. Mental performance coaching that addressed the psychological aspects of competition. Nutritional guidance that optimized athletic performance at the cellular level. But what impressed Maya most was the culture Vasquez had created. Fighters of different backgrounds and skill levels trained alongside each other with mutual respect and shared purpose. Gender, age, and experience became irrelevant in an environment where commitment and character were the only currencies that mattered. This was what her grandmother had envisioned when she talked about martial arts as a path toward becoming your best self. "Your first week will be assessment," Vasquez explained as they returned to the main training floor. "I need to understand not just what you can do, but how you think about fighting. Technical skills can be improved, but mindset is fundamental. Everything else builds from there." Maya nodded, feeling the weight of evaluation that would determine her future in this sport. "What should I expect?" "Honesty," Vasquez replied without hesitation. "From me and from yourself. If you're going to compete at this level, we need to strip away everything that isn't essential and rebuild from a foundation of truth. That includes acknowledging strengths you've been hiding and weaknesses you've been avoiding." The assessment began immediately with basic movement patterns that revealed decades of hidden training. Maya moved through fundamental techniques with precision that spoke of muscle memory carved deep through repetition. Her footwork carried elements of traditional kung fu adapted for modern combat sports. Her hand combinations blended boxing efficiency with martial arts philosophy. Vasquez watched without comment for the first 30 minutes, taking notes that Maya couldn't see but imagining captured details about her technique, timing, and tactical approach. Other fighters in the gym began to notice as well, drawn by movements that didn't fit conventional patterns but carried undeniable effectiveness. "Stop," Vasquez called out as Maya completed a series of combinations on the heavy bag. "Where did you learn that counter sequence?" Maya felt the familiar anxiety of exposure, the fear that her unconventional background would be seen as limitation rather than strength. "My grandmother taught me to see openings in traditional patterns. She said every attack creates opportunities if you know how to look for them. Show me again, but slower this time." Maya repeated the sequence with deliberate precision, demonstrating how traditional kung fu principles could be applied to modern kickboxing combinations. The counter wasn't flashy or dramatic, but it was devastatingly effective, using minimal energy to redirect maximum force. "That's not something you learn in conventional gyms," Vasquez observed. "That's old-school knowledge passed down through generations. How much of this kind of material do you have?" "All of it," Maya admitted. "My grandmother was Grandmaster Liu Chun. She taught me everything she knew before she died." The revelation sent a ripple of recognition through the fighters. Within earshot, Liu Chun's name carried weight in certain circles, legendary status among people who understood the historical significance of her career. Maya had been trained by one of the greatest fighters of her generation, inheriting knowledge that couldn't be found in any instructional video or training manual. "You've been hiding this background for how long?" Vasquez asked with obvious amazement. 7 years, Maya replied. "Since I graduated college and started working in corporate finance." Vasquez shook her head in disbelief. "You've been wasting a gift that most fighters would kill for. Do you understand what you represent? The connection between traditional martial arts and modern competition that everyone talks about, but nobody has actually achieved?" Maya felt tears threatening as the full weight of her grandmother's legacy settled on her shoulders. She'd been carrying forward knowledge that belonged not just to her family, but to the broader martial arts community. By hiding her abilities, she'd been depriving the sport of innovations that could benefit everyone who pursued fighting seriously. "I was scared," Maya said quietly. "Scared of being judged, scared of failing, scared of not living up to what she represented. And now?" Maya looked around the gym at fighters who were pursuing their dreams with complete commitment, who had chosen authenticity over security, who understood that greatness required risk. "Now I'm more scared of never trying than I am of failing." Vasquez smiled with the satisfaction of someone whose instincts had been proven correct. "Then let's see what we can build together. But understand this, the tournament is just the beginning. If you have the ability, I think you do, we're not training for one competition. We're preparing for a career that could change how people think about fighting itself." The promise hung in the air like a challenge and an invitation combined. Maya had spent years hiding her abilities to protect a career that had never truly satisfied her. Now she was being offered the opportunity to pursue her authentic calling, to honor her grandmother's memory by competing at the highest levels, rather than hiding in corporate anonymity. Training began in earnest the following Monday with a schedule that consumed every waking hour. Morning sessions focused on technical refinement, working with Vasquez to adapt traditional techniques for modern competition rules. Afternoon workouts emphasized physical conditioning, building the cardiovascular base and explosive power necessary for sustained high-level performance. Evening sessions addressed mental preparation, developing the psychological tools required to perform under pressure. Maya's body responded to the training load with enthusiasm that surprised even her. Years of careful maintenance had left her fundamentally sound, but the intensive conditioning quickly revealed new levels of capability. Her grandmother's emphasis on internal energy cultivation had built a foundation of core strength and mental focus that accelerated every aspect of athletic development. But the most dramatic changes were psychological rather than physical. For the first time in her adult life, Maya was living without the constant anxiety of maintaining a false identity. She could acknowledge her abilities without fear of professional consequences, could pursue excellence without worrying about corporate image. The relief was so profound that it initially left her feeling unmoored, uncertain how to navigate a world where authentic self-expression was not just permitted, but required. "You're fighting yourself more than you're fighting the techniques," Vasquez observed during a particularly frustrating training session. "Stop thinking like an accountant and start thinking like a warrior." Maya paused in her combination work, breathing heavily from the intensity of the pace Vasquez maintained. "What do you mean?" "Accountants manage risk and minimize exposure. Warriors assess situations and commit completely to their chosen course of action. You can't compete effectively if part of your mind is still calculating the safest possible approach." The observation stung because it was accurate. Maya had spent so many years approaching life with careful calculation that full commitment felt foreign and dangerous. Even here, in an environment designed to reward complete dedication, she found herself holding back in ways that limited her effectiveness. "How do I change that?" Maya asked. By understanding that fighting is about truth, Vasquez replied. When you step into the ring, there's nowhere to hide. Every weakness gets exposed, every strength gets tested. The only way to succeed is by accepting that truth and working with it rather than against it. Maya nodded, recognizing the wisdom in words that echoed her grandmother's teachings about authentic self-expression. Liu Chun had often said that martial arts were ultimately about becoming who you really were rather than who you thought you should be. The process required stripping away everything that wasn't essential until only truth remained. As the weeks passed, Maya began to understand what Vasquez meant about fighting being a path toward truth. The intensive training revealed aspects of her character that had been hidden beneath layers of professional conditioning. She discovered reserves of determination that surprised her, mental toughness that had been developed through years of quiet persistence rather than dramatic confrontation. But she also discovered limitations that humbled her. Technical skills that she'd thought were advanced proved insufficient for high-level competition. Physical conditioning that had seemed adequate revealed weaknesses under the stress of sustained training. Mental approaches that had worked in private practice crumbled under the pressure of public evaluation. This is why we train, Vasquez explained during a particularly difficult sparring session, where Maya had struggled to implement her game plan. To discover who we really are when everything comfortable gets stripped away. The fighter you are today isn't the fighter you'll be in 6 weeks. Maya left that training session with bruises that served as physical reminders of lessons learned through direct experience. But she also left with growing confidence in her ability to adapt and improve. Each challenge revealed new capacities for growth. Each setback provided information that could be used to build better strategies. The transformation wasn't just physical or technical, but social as well. The other fighters at elite combat sports began to accept Maya as a legitimate member of their community rather than an outsider playing at being tough. Conversations that had once been polite and superficial became genuine exchanges of technical knowledge and mutual support. Marcus Rivera, a light heavyweight who'd initially been skeptical of Maya's abilities, approached her after a particularly intense training session with newfound respect. "I've been training here for 3 years," he said, "and I've never seen anyone adapt techniques the way you do. It's like you're speaking a different language that somehow makes perfect sense." Maya appreciated the recognition but understood that her unconventional background was both strength and potential liability. The techniques her grandmother had taught her were effective but unfamiliar to most opponents. That unfamiliarity could provide tactical advantages in competition, but it also meant she was operating without established models for how to develop her skills further. "Your grandmother created something unique when she trained you," Vasquez observed during one of their private coaching sessions. Traditional kung fu adapted for modern competition in ways that preserve the philosophical foundation while maximizing practical effectiveness. But that means you're pioneering territory that nobody has mapped before. Maya felt the weight of responsibility that came with carrying forward her grandmother's innovations. "What if I'm not good enough to represent her legacy properly?" "Then you'll fail spectacularly and learn from the experience," Vasquez replied with characteristic directness. "But you'll fail as yourself rather than succeeding as someone else's idea of what you should be. Your grandmother didn't become legendary by playing it safe." The observation resonated with stories Maya had heard about Liu Chun's competitive career. Her grandmother had faced opponents who were larger, stronger, and more experienced, but she'd succeeded through intelligence, preparation, and absolute commitment to her chosen path. She'd never tried to become someone else to fit conventional expectations of what a fighter should be. As the tournament approached, Maya's training intensified to levels that pushed every aspect of her conditioning. Technical sessions became longer and more detailed, focusing on specific scenarios she might encounter against different types of opponents. Physical preparation emphasized explosive power and recovery, building the capacity to perform at maximum. intensity for the duration of multiple fights in a single day. But the most important preparation was mental, developing the psychological tools necessary to compete under pressure that exceeded anything she'd experienced in private training. Vasquez brought in sports psychologists and mental performance, coaches who specialized in combat sports, experts who understood the unique challenges of performing when failure meant physical consequences rather than just disappointment. Fighting is the most honest sport that exists, one of the mental performance coaches explained during a visualization session. Everything you are gets revealed under pressure. The goal isn't to eliminate that pressure, but to perform better. Because of it, Maya learned techniques for managing pre-competition anxiety, for maintaining focus during the chaos of active fighting, for recovering mentally between rounds when physical exhaustion threatened to cloud tactical thinking. The mental skills proved as demanding as any physical technique, requiring the same kind of dedicated practice to develop reliable effectiveness. 3 weeks before the tournament, Maya faced her first serious test in a full-contact sparring session against Jennifer Walsh, a regional champion who'd agreed to help with Maya's preparation. Walsh represented exactly the kind of opponent Maya would likely face in competition. Technically sound, physically powerful, experienced in high-pressure situations. The sparring session lasted 5 rounds of 3 minutes each, designed to simulate tournament conditions as closely as possible. Maya's unconventional techniques proved effective in the early rounds, catching Walsh off guard with combinations that didn't follow conventional patterns. But as the session progressed, Walsh began to solve Maya's tactical puzzles, using her experience to neutralize unfamiliar techniques through superior positioning and timing. Interesting, Walsh observed as they removed their protective gear. After the final round, "You fight like nobody I've ever faced before. But you also telegraph your intentions in ways that experienced fighters will pick up on quickly." Maya appreciated the feedback but understood its implications. Her traditional background provided certain advantages but also created predictable patterns that could be exploited by savvy opponents. The remaining weeks of preparation would need to focus on developing tactical flexibility that could adapt to whatever challenges emerged during actual competition. Vasquez gathered Maya and her coaching team for a detailed analysis of the sparring session video, breaking down each exchange to identify strengths that could be enhanced and weaknesses that needed immediate attention. The process was humbling but educational, revealing aspects of her fighting style that were invisible during the heat of action. "Your grandmother's techniques are beautiful and effective," Vasquez observed as they watched Maya execute a particularly elegant counter sequence. "But beauty doesn't win fights. Effectiveness wins fights. We need to strip away everything that doesn't contribute directly to winning and enhance everything that does." The final weeks of preparation took on an intensity that consumed Maya's entire existence. Training sessions became longer and more focused. Conditioning workouts pushed her body to limits she hadn't known existed. Technical refinement addressed details so subtle that only experienced coaches could identify them. But the most dramatic changes were happening in Maya's mind, where years of careful restraint were being replaced by commitment to competitive excellence. Maya began to dream about fighting, her subconscious mind working through tactical scenarios and technical adjustments even during sleep. She found herself analyzing the movement patterns of strangers on the street, unconsciously assessing potential opponents and strategic approaches. The transformation from hidden martial artist to committed competitor was becoming complete at levels deeper than conscious decision-making. 1 week before the tournament, Maya received an unexpected visitor at Elite Combat Sports. Derek Thornton arrived unannounced during an evening training session, his presence creating immediate tension among fighters who remembered his dismissive treatment of Maya during her time at Steelhead. "Rodriguez," Thornton called out as Maya finished a combination on the heavy bag. "Heard you're planning to compete next weekend." Maya turned to face him with wariness tempered by newfound confidence. That's correct. Is there something you need? Thornton looked around the gym with obvious discomfort, clearly out of place in an environment where his authority meant nothing. Just wanted to see if you were serious about this, or if it was another one of your attention-seeking stunts. The insult hung in the air like a challenge, drawing the attention of every fighter within earshot. Maya felt the familiar heat of anger rising in her chest, but underneath it was something new. Absolute confidence in her ability to back up any claim she might make. I guess you'll find out next weekend, Maya replied evenly. Assuming you're planning to attend. Thornton's laugh carried genuine malice. Wouldn't miss it. Should be entertaining to watch reality catch up with delusion. As Thornton left the gym, Elena Vasquez approached Maya with an expression that mixed concern with anticipation. Personal history? He's the coach who spent months telling me I'd never be good enough to compete, Maya replied. Turns out he was wrong about a lot of things. Vasquez nodded with understanding that came from years of dealing with people who confused authority with expertise. Good. Nothing motivates like proving doubters wrong. But remember, you're not fighting him next weekend. You're fighting opponents who deserve your complete focus and respect. Maya appreciated the reminder, but understood that Thornton's presence had crystallized something important about her motivation for competing. This wasn't just about honoring her grandmother's memory or pursuing personal fulfillment. This was about proving that talent and dedication could overcome institutional prejudice, that authentic ability was more powerful than conventional expectations. The final week of preparation passed in a blur of technical refinement and mental preparation. Maya's sparring partners reported that her techniques were becoming sharper and more unpredictable. Her tactical awareness was improving with each session. Her confidence was building toward levels that would be essential for competitive success. But underneath the growing competence was an awareness that she was approaching a test that would define not just her fighting career, but her entire identity going forward. Win or lose, she would never again be able to hide behind the safety of anonymity. After next weekend, she would be known as either a legitimate competitor or someone who'd failed spectacularly in pursuit of impossible dreams. Maya spent her final evening before the tournament alone in her apartment, moving through the traditional forms her grandmother had taught her 24 years earlier. Each movement carried memories of a basement studio in Chinatown where ancient wisdom had been passed down through generations of dedicated practice. Each technique connected her to a lineage that extended far beyond her individual ambitions. As she completed the final sequence, Maya felt her grandmother's presence in the quiet apartment, not as memory or imagination, but as living connection to principles that transcended individual success or failure. Tomorrow she would step into the ring carrying not just her own hopes, but the legacy of everyone who'd ever chosen authenticity over safety, excellence over mediocrity. The tournament would test everything she'd learned about fighting, but more importantly, it would test everything she'd learned about herself. Maya closed her eyes and felt the certainty that had been building through weeks of intensive preparation. She was ready for whatever tomorrow would bring. The Pacific Northwest Regional Championship took place in a converted warehouse in Tacoma that had been transformed into a legitimate fighting venue for the weekend. Maya arrived 3 hours before her scheduled fight time, carrying a gear bag that contained everything she'd need for what might be the most important day of her life. The building hummed with nervous energy as dozens of competitors prepared for matches that would determine regional rankings and advancement opportunities. Elena Vasquez met Maya at the athlete entrance with a calm confidence that immediately settled her pre-competition nerves. "How are you feeling?" she asked as they made their way through the maze of warm-up areas and staging zones. "Ready," Maya replied, surprised by how true the word felt. After weeks of intensive preparation, she'd reached a state of mental clarity that felt almost supernatural. Every technique was sharp in her memory, every tactical scenario had been rehearsed until her responses became instinctive. Every aspect of her preparation had been refined to tournament-ready condition. The atmosphere inside the venue was electric with anticipation. Spectators filled bleachers that surrounded 3 fighting rings where matches would take place simultaneously throughout the day. The crowd represented a cross-section of the regional martial arts community, from casual fans to serious competitors to coaches scouting talent for their own programs. Maya spotted Derek Thornton near the main ring, surrounded by several fighters from Steelhead who'd qualified for various divisions. His presence was a reminder of the professional bridges she'd burned to pursue this opportunity, but also confirmation that her decision to compete had drawn attention from people who dismissed her potential for years. "Block him out," Vasquez advised, following Maya's gaze. "Today is about proving something to yourself, not to anyone else." Maya nodded and focused on her preparation routine, moving through dynamic warm-ups that activated the muscle groups she'd be using during competition. The physical activity helped channel her nervous energy into productive focus, transforming anxiety into the kind of controlled aggression that would serve her well in the ring. The bantamweight division had drawn 16 competitors, meaning Maya would need to win 4 fights to claim the championship. Her first opponent was Sarah Martinez, a conventional kickboxer from Portland whose record indicated solid technical skills without any particular specialization. On paper, it appeared to be a manageable opening match that would allow Maya to settle into tournament rhythm before facing more dangerous opposition. But Maya had learned during her weeks of preparation that assumptions were dangerous and competitive. Fighting. Every opponent possessed the potential to end her tournament dreams with a single well-timed technique. Every match required complete focus regardless of apparent skill disparities. The moment she allowed confidence to become complacency would be the moment her championship aspirations died. Maya's name echoed through the venue sound system as she made her way toward Ring 2 for the opening bout. The walk felt longer than the actual distance, each step carrying the weight of decisions that had led to this moment. Behind her was the safety of anonymity and corporate predictability. Ahead was the dangerous territory of authentic self-expression under the most demanding circumstances possible. Sarah Martinez waited in the opposite corner with the loose confidence of someone who'd competed dozens of times before. She moved through her final warm-up combinations with technical proficiency that confirmed Maya's assessment of her as a solid but unremarkable opponent. Nothing about Martinez's preparation suggested she would provide anything beyond routine resistance. The referee called both fighters to the center of the ring for final instructions, and Maya felt the familiar transformation that occurred when competition became imminent. External noise faded to background static, her vision narrowed to focus exclusively on relevant tactical information. Her breathing deepened into the rhythm that would sustain her through the physical demands ahead. "Fight smart, stay composed. Trust your preparation," Vasquez called from the corner as the referee signaled for the action to begin. The opening round unfolded exactly as Maya had expected based on her video study of Martinez's previous fights. Her opponent relied on conventional combinations delivered with good technique but predictable timing, creating exactly the kind of opportunities that Maya's unconventional style was designed to exploit. Traditional kung fu footwork allowed her to create angles that Martinez couldn't anticipate, while adapted hand techniques found openings in defenses that were sound against conventional attacks. Maya controlled the pace and distance throughout the first round, landing clean strikes while avoiding the power shots that Martinez threw with increasing frustration. By the time the bell ended the opening period, Maya had established both tactical and psychological dominance that would be difficult for her opponent to overcome. "Perfect execution," Vasquez said during the brief rest period. "She's getting desperate, which means she start taking risks. Stay patient and capitalize when she overcommits." The second round confirmed Vasquez's prediction as Martinez abandoned her technical approach in favor of aggressive pressure that created exactly the openings Maia needed to showcase her finishing ability. A perfectly timed counter caught Martinez moving forward with her weight committed, connecting with precision that ended the fight decisively. Maia's hand was raised in victory to polite applause from spectators who hadn't yet recognized what they were witnessing. But in the coaching areas around the venue, experienced eyes had noted techniques that didn't fit conventional patterns, movement that suggested training backgrounds not commonly seen in regional competition. 1 down, 3 to go, Vasquez said as they returned to the warm-up area. "How do you feel?" Maia assessed her physical and mental condition with the thoroughness her preparation had taught her. "Like I could do that 7 more times," she replied honestly. Her second opponent proved more challenging, but still manageable. Jessica Rodriguez from Sacramento possessed superior athletic ability and had clearly studied video of Maia's first fight, but she lacked the tactical sophistication necessary to neutralize techniques she'd never encountered before. Maia's victory was more competitive but never really in doubt, confirming that her preparation had been adequate for the level of opposition she was facing. The semifinal match presented Maia's first serious test of the tournament. Amanda Chun, ironically sharing Maia's family name despite no relation, was a former collegiate wrestler who transitioned to kickboxing with considerable success. Her grappling background had given her balance and body awareness that made her extremely difficult to hurt, while her striking had improved dramatically through dedicated training with respected coaches. "This is where the tournament really starts," Vasquez warned during Maia's preparation for the semifinal bout. "Chun is good enough to exploit any weakness you show her, but she's also never faced anything like what you bring to the table." Maia studied Chun's warm-up routine with newfound respect for her opponent's capabilities. The woman moved with the controlled power of someone who'd spent years learning to dominate other trained athletes through superior technique and conditioning. This wouldn't be a fight that could be won through surprising an unprepared opponent with unusual techniques. The semifinal began with both fighters feeling each other out carefully, each recognizing that they were facing serious opposition that required adjustments from their usual approaches. Chun's wrestling background made her extremely difficult to catch off balance, while her striking had developed enough sophistication to threaten Maia whenever exchanges became extended. Maia found herself working harder than she had in either of her previous fights, forced to use her full range of skills to maintain tactical advantage against an opponent who adapted quickly to everything she tried. Chun's grappling instincts allowed her to tie up Maia's combinations before they could develop full power, while her striking created enough threat to prevent Maia from fighting at her preferred range and rhythm. The first round ended without either fighter establishing clear dominance, though Maia felt she'd landed the cleaner shots when opportunities presented themselves. But she also recognized that Chun was studying her patterns and would likely make significant adjustments for the remaining rounds. She's trying to turn this into a grinding match where conditioning becomes the deciding factor, Vasquez observed during the rest period. "Don't let her. Stay sharp, stay technical, and finish your combinations completely." The second round saw Chun implement a strategy designed to neutralize Maia's technical advantages through sustained pressure that prevented the development of sophisticated combinations. But the approach also created opportunities for the kind of close-range work where Maia's traditional background provided unique advantages that Chun couldn't anticipate or counter effectively. Maia began to find success with techniques that her grandmother had taught her for exactly these situations. Methods of generating power from positions where conventional wisdom suggested offense was impossible. Each successful application built confidence while frustrating Chun's attempts to impose her preferred fighting style. The third and final round became a showcase for everything Maia had learned about competitive fighting during her weeks of intensive preparation. Chun came out with desperate aggression, knowing she needed a finish to overcome the deficit from the previous rounds. But Maya met that pressure with composed counter-fighting that turned her opponent's aggression into tactical liability. The final combination that secured Maya's victory was pure Lu Chun, a traditional sequence that her grandmother had used in professional competition decades earlier. The techniques flowed together with mechanical precision that spoke of thousands of repetitions, creating an opening that existed for only a fraction of a second before Maya exploited it decisively. Chun went down hard and didn't get up before the referee's count reached 10, leaving Maya standing alone in the center of the ring as the reality of reaching the tournament final began to sink in. The crowd's reaction was noticeably louder than it had been for her earlier victories, suggesting that people were beginning to recognize they were witnessing something unusual. "Championship fight," Vasquez said simply as Maya returned to the corner. "Everything you've worked for comes down to one more fight." Maya's final opponent was exactly who she'd expected to face when the tournament bracket was announced. Rebecca Thompson was the defending regional champion, a professional-level fighter who dominated the division for 3 consecutive years. Her record included victories over opponents who'd gone on to successful careers in major organizations, and her technical skills were considered among the best in the country at her weight class. Thompson represented everything that Maya aspired to become as a competitive fighter. Her technique was flawless, her conditioning was legendary. Her tactical intelligence was demonstrated through years of defeating high-level opposition. She was also everything that made Maya's unconventional background potentially valuable, since Thompson's preparation would have been based on studying conventional opponents rather than traditional martial artists adapted for modern competition. "She's never faced anything like you," Vasquez reminded Maya as they prepared for the championship bout. "But you've also never faced anything like her. This is what we've been building toward since your first day at the gym." The venue's energy reached peak intensity as the championship fight was announced. Maya could see Derek Thornton near ringside, his expression a mixture of skepticism and grudging interest as he watched someone he'd dismissed compete for a regional title. The irony wasn't lost on her that the man who'd told her she'd never be good enough to fight was now watching her in the biggest match of her life. Thompson entered the ring with the calm confidence of someone who'd been in this situation many times before. She moved through her final preparations with economy of motion that spoke of complete professional preparation. Every detail of her routine optimized for peak performance when the bell rang. Maya felt different approaching this fight than she had for any of her previous matches. The nervous energy that had characterized her earlier preparation was replaced by something deeper and more sustainable. A connection to purpose that extended beyond individual achievement to honoring the legacy her grandmother had passed down through generations of dedicated practice. The opening round of the championship fight was unlike anything Maya had experienced during her brief competitive career. Thompson's technique was indeed flawless, her timing was exceptional, and her tactical awareness created problems that Maya had never encountered against any sparring partner or previous opponent. But Maya's unconventional style also created challenges that Thompson hadn't anticipated, forcing the champion to make adjustments that interfered with her usual rhythm and preferred strategies. Both fighters landed clean shots during the opening period, but neither was able to establish the kind of dominance that typically characterized Thompson's championship performances. Maya realized that she was not only competitive with someone she'd watched on video for years, but actually creating tactical problems that the veteran champion struggled to solve. "She's frustrated," Vasquez observed during the rest period. "She expected to solve your style in the first round, and now she's having to work harder than she's used to. Stay patient and keep doing what got you here." The second round saw Thompson adjust her approach, using her superior conditioning to increase the pace and volume of exchanges in an attempt to overwhelm Maya through sustained pressure. The strategy was sound and might have worked against a conventional opponent, but Maya's traditional background had prepared her for exactly this kind of grinding warfare through methods that emphasized efficiency over volume. Maya began to find success with techniques that her grandmother had taught her specifically for situations where opponents tried to impose their physical advantages through sustained aggression. Ancient methods of redirecting force rather than meeting it directly, using an opponent's momentum against them while conserving energy for decisive moments. As the second round progressed, it became clear that Thompson's strategy was backfiring. Her attempts to overwhelm Maya through volume were succeeding only in tiring herself while providing more opportunities for the kind of counterattacks where Maya's unconventional techniques were most effective. The round ended with Maya having clearly won the most significant exchanges, leaving Thompson facing the unfamiliar situation of being behind on the scorecards, heading into the final period of a championship fight. Maya could see the doubt creeping into the veteran champion's eyes, the first crack in confidence that had carried her through years of regional dominance. "This is it," Vasquez said as Maya prepared for the final round. "Everything we've worked for, everything your grandmother taught you, everything you've sacrificed to get here. 3 minutes to prove that talent and dedication can overcome any obstacle." Thompson came out for the final round with the desperate aggression of someone who knew her championship reign was slipping away. But desperation also led to exactly the kind of tactical mistakes that Maya had been training to exploit since her first day at Elite Combat Sports. The combination that ended the fight was poetry written in violence, a sequence of techniques that began with traditional kung fu footwork, flowed through adapted boxing combinations, and concluded with a roundhouse kick that carried 24 years of dedicated training behind its impact. Thompson went down like a building whose foundation had been removed, and the referee's count felt like ceremonial confirmation of something that had been inevitable since the technique connected. Maya stood in the center of the ring as her hand was raised in victory, regional champion in her first tournament, living proof that authenticity and dedication could overcome any institutional obstacle. The crowd's reaction was thunderous, a mixture of appreciation for exceptional competition and recognition that they had witnessed something historically significant. Derek Thornton was gone by the time Maya left the ring, unwilling to acknowledge that his assessment of her potential had been completely wrong. But his absence only reinforced the validation that Maya felt watching people who understood fighting excellence recognize her achievement as legitimate rather than lucky. "Regional champion," Vasquez said as they gathered Maya's gear for the trip home. "But more importantly, you proved that your grandmother's legacy belongs in modern competition. This is just the beginning of what you can accomplish." Maya looked around the venue one final time, taking inventory of a journey that had transformed her from hidden martial artist to legitimate champion in the space of a few months. The path had required sacrificing financial security and professional respectability, but it had also revealed capabilities that she'd never known she possessed. 6 months later, Maya stood in Elena Vasquez's office reviewing offers from promoters who wanted to showcase her unique style in professional competition. The regional championship had opened doors that led toward opportunities she'd never dared to imagine, each one representing another step away from the safety of anonymity and toward the dangerous territory of authentic self-expression. "Your grandmother would be proud," Vasquez said as Maya signed the contract that would make her a professional fighter. "You honored her memory by proving that traditional knowledge belongs in modern competition." Maya picked up the pen that would formalize her commitment to pursuing fighting as a career rather than a hobby. But before signing, she thought about the basement studio in Chinatown where Liu Chun had passed down knowledge that now belonged to the world rather than just to her family. "She always said that talent doesn't need permission to exist," Maya replied as she signed her name with handwriting that grew steadier with each letter. "But sometimes it needs courage to reveal itself." The transformation was complete, and the journey was just beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.